Hi, good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, I guess, if you're on the West Coast. This is Dean Woodbeck from InCommon Internet 2, and thank you for joining us today for IamOnline. And IamOnline is brought to you by InCommon and Internet 2 and the EDUCAUSE Higher Education Information Security Council. We're taking questions and other comments like rumbling in the chat. And I'll see what I can do about my echo, Ben. Thank you. So today's IamOnline is managing affiliate, alumni, and other identities with COmanage. And COmanage is typically spelled with a capital O there, so sorry about that typo on the screen. We've got three speakers today. Kicking off to introduce folks to COmanage is Ben Oshran, who is with Spherical Cow Group, and he's also the lead developer for the COmanage project. So he'll do an intro, and then we'll hear two campus use cases. Case studies, I guess, is probably a better way to put it. The first will be from Jane Marie Dew from Lafayette College, and she is the identity management an identity management architect there. She is also the vice chair of the InCommon Technical Advisory Committee. And then we'll also hear from Jeff Rook, who is a member of the middleware team at Colorado State University. So Ben, I will turn it over to you. Take it away.
All right, thanks, Dean, and good morning/afternoon, everyone. I've been asked to basically provide a quick overview of what COmanage is for those of you who might not have heard of it before, and so we'll do just that before handing off to our primary speakers today. So a bit of terminology to start with. What is COmanage, or what is COmanage Registry? COmanage is the project, and Registry is the product that you'll be hearing about on today's presentations. Sort of like Shibboleth and IDP, where Shibboleth is the project and the identity provider is one of the products within the project. So COmanage Registry is specifically a person registry. It's a place to store information about people, but it also can store other objects like groups, departments, email lists, etc. It primarily provides an enrollment lifecycle and attribute management service, and it's capable of complex representations of people with multiple components to their identity, because the project comes out of the research and education community, where this is a basic requirement of identity management services. By way of history, the current version of the COmanage project was originally funded by the NSF via Internet 2 as a project for virtual organization identity management. And here's where we put in our obligatory LIGO reference. LIGO was one of the 4 VOs on the grant and turned out to be the primary one that we worked with. It turns out virtual organization identity needs are pretty similar to institutional identity needs. And so what we've been seeing over the last couple of years is increased interest in the work that came out of that project in the more quote-unquote traditional campus institutional contexts. And we've got a list of some of our deployers, and not just deployers, but also contributors, institutions who've helped with the product development over the last couple of years listed below. So what can you do with COmanage Registry? There are a few different use cases that the project can be adapted for. The first, of course, being virtual organization and collaboration management, and that drove from the original grant-funded work from a few years ago. What you'll be hearing about today includes guest or non-traditional population management using COmanage basically as a tool to manage non-traditional populations. And you could even use it as a university identity registry. Of course, the footnote takes away what the bold text gives. Some integration work may be required, but that's sort of par for the course for identity management services. To provide a quick overview of how these how COmanage can fit into an overall architecture diagram. We've got 2 examples here. The top diagram shows registry as a primary registry talking to your systems of record and then pushing data into a downstream provisioning service such as Midpoint and then out to campus applications. The lower diagram is the one that will be closer to what we're looking at today, although not exactly, where registry serves as a system of record itself, which then pushes into your provisioning infrastructure and campus applications. The design of COmanage is to allow replacement of services that are not necessarily core features. So while COmanage has some group management and provisioning capabilities, the idea is that as your needs grow or as you get to the campus scale, you probably want to pull those out and replace them with other components such as Grouper or Midpoint. The entire product is UI-driven for configuration and operation, so there's no XML files to muck around with, and there is a REST API and other interfaces for managing data. At a very high level, the capabilities include person and role attribute management, including multi-valued names, addresses, email addresses, etc., identifier assignment management, so things like an ID assignment or campus identifier assignment, as well as tracking of external, meaning federated or social, for example, identifiers. And you can organize your population into what are internally called COUs or collaborative organizational units, as well as departments and, as previously mentioned, perform basic group management. The lifecycle and enrollment management services can be done via self-service and delegated models and support use cases such as enrollment flows, early onboarding. That's where your HR system doesn't know for 2 weeks that you've actually hired somebody, so your identity management system needs to know that. Duplicate management, sponsorship, expiration policies, et cetera, et cetera. There's a full transaction history made at both a human readable level as well as a database level using a copy on write model. And the current release we're at is 3.1.0. 3.2.0 should be out soon with a couple of new features. We usually trail the Internet 2 conferences by about a month on our releases, so that means we'll probably have 3.2 out towards the end of May. And for more information, you can check out the wiki, the Git repo, and also there is a tier packaged version of the software. That's it by way of introductions, so let me hand it off to Jean Marie.
Great, thanks so much, Ben. Thanks everybody for tuning in today. We're happy to talk about our deployment of COmanage here at Lafayette College. We're in Easton, Pennsylvania. So Lafayette, before we get started into what our problem space was for COmanage, I just wanted to introduce you to a couple terms that I'll be using throughout the presentation to give you a level set. So when I refer to the sponsor, that's an authorized person who is requesting a sponsored account. The enrollee is the affiliate who needs access to services at Lafayette, and our ERP is Banner. So we call the sprite-in identifier the L number. And the sponsored account is what we create in order to give an affiliate access that is beyond that provided by a temporary guest wireless account, which we've got a user-facing utility to do that. So those are 72-hour accounts. So sponsored account is something longer term with broader access. So at Lafayette, we've got a custom engineered identity management system called the Accounts Workflow. And this handles faculty and staff, so it's all employees. The Provost's office and HR use it to submit requests to IAM to onboard employees. They are required to do double data entry because it's a set of web forms. So they also need to add the record simultaneously in Banner. And the accounts workflow forms do require that an L number is entered. So when our scripts on the back end run, pulling the requests out of the database, that we can check our enterprise directory, which is OpenLDAP, for any duplicates in case the person has been here before. So we've got double data entry, we've got the web forms, and we've got a dependency on an L number for the unique key that would link our accounts in OpenLDAP with what we have in Banner. So related to affiliates of the college, the problem with this was that our intake process uses one of the accounts workflow forms for what we call other employees. So these are things like interns, research assistants, volunteers, but also paid temporary people. And so the form has as a requirement begin and end dates. So a lot of times if somebody's coming in as a volunteer or a dining services person who's not employed by the college, the person doesn't know, the hiring supervisor doesn't know what the end date's going to be. So, we would find that people would just end fictitious employment end dates into the thing. And another problem with this method of intake for affiliates was that the identity lifecycle was unmanaged. So even though the people came in with an employment end date and we send that to a database, we didn't have any process in place for deprovisioning accounts. And so we didn't know if people were still here, if they're gone, and who do we even contact to find out. So we just had this unmanaged problem space for affiliates. So a moonshot. So we had run into Ben at one of the Internet 2 conferences. I think that was my director, Bill Thompson, who talked to him. And talking a little bit about what the capabilities of COmanage is. Would it be possible for Lafayette to use COmanage as a system of record for affiliates that could provision DNs in our LDAP and track the life cycle of sponsored accounts? So we engaged with Spherical Cow Group, and we worked with Ben, and earlier he talked about some integration being required to get COmanage to work. And of course, in our case, we needed to do some customizations, and there were integration concerns that I'll get to in a little bit to fit it into our identity management system. So here's an architectural diagram that includes COmanage for sponsored accounts, which is over on the right side with the yellow new banner above it. So this is what we had envisioned as far as the integration into our IDMS. So the end users, we were thinking we got sponsors, and we've got my team, Identity and Access Management, actually tapping into COmanage, and then COmanage would provision out to our open LDAP, possibly provision to Grouper to add policy group memberships, and in the rest of the diagram there you see over on the left side, HR and Provost entering records in the banner, and then also entering into the accounts workflow, and then getting pulled into our auto accounts database where we have scripts run, and then other key service accounts are created, like Zimber email, which we run locally, and some other things. So this was the idea. So using COmanage as a system of record for affiliates of the college. So our initial use case, once we took a look at COmanage, talked with Ben to see, is this feasible? The use case that we settled on was consultants. Once we deployed COmanage, we found that the integration that we did just worked seamlessly with other constituencies of affiliates, such as our outsourced dining services employees, even external reviewers of academic departments, financial auditors, and other types of affiliates. So what were the key integration considerations? So we needed to decide where we were going to put the DNs for the sponsored accounts in LDAP. So we've got a pretty nested directory tree structure. We decided to just create a separate OU in LDAP for sponsored accounts, so COmanage would provision the records there. Regarding the NetID generation, we use a name-based identifier for our digital identities. So we had decided that there was no reason to have a separate namespace, so we're using our primary namespace. Again, it's name-based, so the NetIDs are composed. We've got existing heuristics that we use for that. So within COmanage, there were rules that had to get added for doing the NetID composition, which is part of the identifier assignment configuration. Also, in order to create the LDAP DN, we needed to think about what attributes did we want to store in COmanage and provision in LDAP. So we came up with the basic attributes, of course, the personal information, the name, and email address. So COmanage for us is tracking 3 identifiers. It's tracking the NetID, banner L number, and the UID number. So the UID number is used to log on to some computers on campus and does other file services related things. And the UID number we just base on the L number because it's a unique number, so we don't have to worry about collisions for that. We do have a custom LDAP schema, which is called Lafayette Person, that has attribute definitions for banner L number and mail alternate address. Mail alternate address is something that our self-service password reset facility uses. So it's basically an active personal account that our users use. They go to the self-service website and they plug in their NetID, and then it gens a one-time link that gets sent in an email to the personal address. So we needed to capture those in COmanage and write them out to LDAP. Official email addresses, that would be a Lafayette email address if we create an account for affiliates. It depends on what the access requested is. And then the recovery address, we're actually asking for the enrollee, who's the affiliate, their personal address, but I'll get to that a little later. Eduperson affiliation, so we've got a drop down there, but for our use case, which is sponsored accounts, they all get the affiliation of affiliate. And we use Samba for our file services here, so we needed to add a plugin to COmanage in order to provision Samba attributes out to LDAP. So those aren't visible in the enrollment flow in COmanage, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Provisioning targets, so where do the DNs get provisioned? They're getting provisioned in OpenLDAP, so that needed to be configured. The organizational identity source is also OpenLDAP. So a thing to grok here is that not only do the sponsored accounts get added to COmanage, but the sponsors get added to COmanage. So because they're linked, right, because we need to assign a sponsor to each sponsored account, we needed to capture the sponsors in COmanage. So what we have set up is just OpenLDAP as an organizational identity source within COmanage. So if we need to add a sponsor, we just go in and we choose add identity from source, and we plug in either the email address or their last name. There's a couple of parameters that you can put in, and then it just pulls their record from LDAP into COmanage. And then we've got these 2 COUs, the COmanage organizational units. So we've got one for the sponsored accounts and one for the sponsors. So this is a screen cap of, this is the enrollment flow that we go to enter the information on the sponsored account, aka the enrollee. So this is the enrollee induction form. So the COU is already set, so this is a sponsored enrollee. We've got the given name and the family name as required. There is a field for email, which would be an official email address. We collect the business address for the affiliate. And then on the next one, there's the password recovery email, which would be usually the same, so that would match the official email unless they get a Lafayette email account. And then we would put the Lafayette account in as the official email, and the business email would go here into the recovery email. Organization, we usually leave blank unless we know what company it is that they're working for. Same with title, if we know, what their, I hate to use the word, but role or, job title. Sponsor is a drop-down, so if I would click on that, which I can't because it's a screen cap, I would see all of the sponsors that we've added into COmanage via the organizational identity source, which is LDAP. So if I don't find a name here for a sponsor, then I need to go back and I just need to add the identity from source from LDAP. So valid from and valid through, if we have an end date, we will put it in, else our default validity period is a 6-month max. And I'll talk about that more when I talk about the renewals and expirations. And of course, there's also fields for their phone number, which we also collect from the affiliate. L number,
so Jean-Marie,
again,
just a quick question. That valid through then, if the max is 6 months, if somebody enters, you know, a time period that's beyond 6 months, does that override or?
No, it doesn't. So 6
okay.
months is the max, and then at that point our renewal flow kicks in. So I'll touch on that in a little bit. And so I see actually another question here from Michael. Sponsor is an org or a person, so the sponsor is a person. Okay, so on the next screen then, L number, as I said, the UID number, which is based on the L number, and then the affiliation, which is affiliate. And yes, the sponsor is limited to a single person. Okay, so I talked a little bit about what our intake process was previously with our custom engineered accounts workflow system. So this is how it changed with COmanage. So sponsors contact the help desk or IAM directly. So the sponsors are authorized Lafayette employees. So we don't allow other affiliates to sponsor another affiliate account. We don't allow students. It's got to be a Lafayette employee who's doing the sponsoring. So this is a good question. What happens when somebody leaves Lafayette if they are the sponsor of a person? What typically happens is when we see the renewals go out, either we'll get a bounce back or we already know who the replacement was, and then we just have to reassign the sponsor, which of course we can do within COmanage. So the intake process, what we require to create the sponsored account is if somebody contacts the help desk or they contact us, we've just got a little template that we'll put in the email that asks for the following fields, the sponsor name and the email address. This could be, you know, the person who's already contacted us. It might be, you know, a department head, but again, it could be any Lafayette employee. We require the legal name for the enrollee, so no nicknames. Again, the business email address and the phone, and the services that the enrollee needs access to. And again, this is service access, you know, beyond just wireless. Typically, it's, you know, they need to get on to the fax staff network because they need access to System X or they need a Lafayette email account. And, you know, some of these people certainly, they look just like any other fax staff, and except they're just not employees of the college. So in that case, they get a full stack of access. After the fact, after we created the sponsored accounts, if the sponsor needs to request any additional access, we direct them to put in a request to the help desk. And then we do get the begin and end dates if the sponsor knows them. If not, again, they get a 6-month max life cycle. And we do ask for the birth date for the enrollee. So this is used for identity matches. Because we require the L number, our enterprise data management team puts in a basic person record into Banner. So they're capturing the personal information that we get, and they need the birth date in order to see if there's already a record for this person in Banner. And, you know, we've seen this happen before where somebody may have applied to the college, you know, they never attended, but they still have a record in there. We have, in general, had no problem collecting that, although, understandably, some faculty are a little uncomfortable having to get that from their colleagues if it's an external review. But, we just try and stress that it's just for identity matching. So I talked a little bit about what happens with the account creation. So we request that L number, the Spriden ID from Enterprise Data Management. We enter the data into that enrollee induction form. So we don't have any end users using COmanage. It's strictly internal to IAM. And after we input the personal data, COmanage does its thing. It collects the petitioner attributes, finalizes the flow to provision the DN and LDAP, and then it sends a notification email. So the notification email contains the net ID and then the instructions for the self-service password reset. And I see there's another question of putting them into Banner anyways. Why use a separate registry? So yeah, we'll get to that in a little bit. So COmanage is the system of record for affiliates, but we've got that dependency on L number. So at this point, that's how we get the L number, but I'll talk a little more. This is a screen cap of what the flow looked like when COmanage does its thing. So you see the petition was created from the enrollment flow for the induction. It gathers the attributes. It does the identifier assignment, so it's created the net ID. COmanage, I guess, assumes a one-on-one relationship between what's in the COmanage registry and what's in LDAP. What that means is if I enter somebody, say, who's an alum and they're working in some capacity as an affiliate and I don't know they're an alum, COmanage is going to provision a new DN and LDAP with a new net ID. So it's not doing a check because it's assuming this one-to-one relationship. What it is doing is when it composes the net ID, it'll go out to LDAP to see if there's an existing net ID because it obviously tries to avoid collisions, and then it'll go to the next iteration in the heuristic. So this approval notification thing here, that involves a little bit of manual work, which you may have noticed by now we have a bit of this here. So the requesting of the L number and the adding of the enrollee's information into the enrollee induction flow is something that we're doing on our own. So we've got a little bit of overhead there. When we fill out that form, because there likely is additional access that we need to create, we are not sending that notification email right away to the enrollee. What we do is we put our email address into that enrollee induction flow so we get a copy of the email with the net ID. Then once the other access is provisioned, we'll send that email out to the sponsor and the enrollee. And then we go back into COmanage, and if there's a Lafayette address that we created, we go in and we update the official email value, and then we update the enrollee's business email. So, and that has to be done actually in two places because COmanage creates a CO person record and an organizational identity record. So again, manual work, access policy, group memberships, and grouper is still separate from the COmanage process, so we need to do that once we've done the enrollee induction. And then if there's a Lafayette email address, that gets written back to Banner in a separate process. I see one question. We do not allow sponsored accounts to authenticate with social media. We don't have any integration for social identities. So how are renewals and expirations handled? So when we did the configuration, we needed to think about, what would the flows look like for renewals and expiration. So again, we had decided on that 6-month max validity period for the account, so it requires that sponsors reauthorize an enrollee's access. So if somebody's coming in where, the sponsor might know they're going to be here for a year, we're going to put in a 6-month end date into COmanage, and that way the sponsor will get an automated expiration notice. So we've got 3 different intervals that COmanage will send them, and then typically the sponsor will just reply to the email saying, either they need the person re-upped until X date, or they just want the default 6-month period. So what happens if somebody expires? The account is disabled administratively in LDAP. So what that means is that the person then can't go in and set a new password using their recovery email address. So it just prevents any non-admin password updates. So that was something that we had to configure, because COmanage typically would remove the entry from LDAP, which we didn't want to happen. So we maintain them. It's just that they're in a closed state. And I think I have a couple more minutes, and I'll be wrapping this up soon. So what we gained from COmanage were 3 key benefits. So somebody had asked, earlier about, why the duplication between Banner and COmanage. Again, before we had COmanage, this whole process for sponsored accounts was broken. I mean, it was unmanaged, and the solution that we had in place, it just wasn't a good fit for affiliates. I mean, typically affiliates, the relationship with the college is transitory, and the accounts workflow just didn't handle that use case well. So COmanage ensured that each sponsored account has an L number for the purpose of identity matching. So we capture that in COmanage. It's based on the Sprite ID in Banner, and the L number is in LDAP. So we always know who the person is, we're talking about. The next one is important. We've got a known and tracked sponsor for each enrollee, so we know who's going to, speak for them and authorize their access, and also we know who we can contact now to term the account. And finally, of course, that the entire identity lifecycle of affiliates is now managed. So, I mean, this was the biggest win for us. Looking ahead, so I think it's been, oh gosh, Ben can help me out with this one, but I think it's probably coming up on 2 years maybe in January that we had this project. So, something that's been on my mind is, what next for phase 2? So certainly it's, to address, some of the, the issues related to, the manual work that I talked about earlier, and specifically with provisioning. So it would be nice to either integrate COmanage with Banner, or what we've been thinking about is, somehow having a set of reserved L numbers in Banner that would just be designated for use with sponsored accounts, and then, if COmanage could keep track of this pool and then assign an L number, as we do the enrollee induction, that would be a really good thing. So we'll see where that goes. Provisioning to Zimbra, which is our locally run email platform, and writing the Lafayette address back to COmanage would be a good thing. We're actually doing a G Suite evaluation right now, so I'm not sure where this will go in the long term. Access-related issue with respect to finalizing the enrollment, right? So this has to do with the notification that gets sent out. So we're putting in our own email addresses, so we get the enrollment email first, because we don't want it going out to the enrollee before all the access has been provisioned. So again, hooking up COmanage with other systems to do provisioning would help. Certainly what would also help is if there was, say, a button that would finalize the flow. So, we would go in, we would enter all of the personal information, but it would just not do the finalization of the flow. So, once we did everything, if it could, hit a button and then maybe it does the DN and LDAP, or not, maybe the DN's already been created, but it would just not generate that email. Also, a resend button for the email would be good. there's been instances where the enrollee says, I didn't get the email, so what if you need to resend it, right? A resend button would be pretty helpful there. So at this point, we are managing 123 sponsored accounts people in our sponsored account COU. Kind of as we go along, there's, of course, existing sponsored accounts. When we run into them in drips and drabs, we're bringing those under the management of COmanage. I think we have all of our dining services people in COmanage now. So I know a lot of people wanted to hear about our use case, and I think in general, it's safe to say that COmanage really has solved the problem that we hoped it would. So get on the bus and get happy and give COmanage a try. And let's see if we have any other questions here. Yeah, integration instead of the pool management for the L numbers for the primary identifier. Okay. And I'll keep my eye on the chat and see if there's any unanswered questions. But up next, we're going to hear from Jeff Rook at Colorado State on external identities with COmanage. And Jeff?
Great. Thanks, Jen Marie. As mentioned, my name's Jeff Rook. I'm with the middleware group at Colorado State. And today I'm going to talk about our external identities project and specifically how COmanage is involved in that. And it's a little bit different than what Jan Marie did in the sense that we have COmanage more on the back end and have a separate UI. So let's get into it. Wrong button. Okay. Table of contents. I'll talk about kind of the project drivers, what really led to this project getting done. I'll talk about our solution. As mentioned, we have a different UI, so I'll talk about the user experience and show some screenshots. And then I'll go into how the site was built, or how the solution was built, talking about our existing IAM environment, basically what we started with. And then we added 3 new software packages, basically, for the solution. One is obviously COmanage, so I'll talk about the role of COmanage. Also, we are using some software solutions from Cirrus Identity. And in addition, we're also using the Microsoft Azure Cloud Service Bus. So I'll talk about how those are all used. And then next, I will go into the kind of the architecture and the flow of the solution, and that's really the kind of the meat and potatoes of the presentation. See how it works on the back end, and also the flow of the data, and then I'll talk about exactly what we're storing in COmanage. And then finally, I'll talk about kind of what's next for phase 2 and where we're at, and leave some time for questions. So let's get started. Advancement. Our advancement group has a website called Donor Connect, and it allows for CSU donors to log in and get tax receipts. They can see their giving history, and for like high-end, they can see an endowment balance. And donors are obviously very important to us at CSU, so we want to make sure that we make everything as smooth and as possible for them. To the right on this screen, you can see that it's kind of the login page for this application, and this is prior to us implementing the project. And there's 2 types of users. There's those that are affiliated with CSU, and those could be alumni or anyone that had any type of affiliation. And then you also have some donors that have no affiliation at all, which is where this came in. Let's see. Go on to the next. Oh. Okay, so project drivers. One of the biggest issues that was reported to our advancement group is that people had issues logging in. As mentioned, a lot of people only logged in once per year, and to have a separate username and password, they'd often forget it. They'd have to reset it, and this was identified as the most difficult issue with the application. So the second piece was advancement really didn't like the idea of having to manage this separate credentials. They didn't like having the overhead. They were concerned about the liability because obviously there's some financial information and so forth. So they really wanted to get out of that business. And how they do the, previous to the project, how they did the credentials was there was two processes. One, as I mentioned, there was a local username password, and this is the one that we replaced. And then second, they also had an email invitation, and that's where they would send an email out and use double DES encryption, and that would allow someone to log in. That's still in place, but we're looking to replace that too in phase 2. So I'll talk about that a little bit later as well. Okay, so what do we do? Advancement came back and said, hey, what we really need is to have a social login. The reasoning being is, you know, people are logging into their social accounts daily. Everyone remembers their social account. No one remembers their, you know, advanced ID and password. So they felt it would be more secure using OAuth and so forth. And also they felt this would take the liability away from CSU. They didn't want to have to manage usernames and passwords anymore. So that's what Advancement wanted. Everyone agreed also that, you know, there's more use cases than just what we found with the Donor Connect, and that having a unique CSU identifier that could be used across multiple systems and technologies could be used across multiple things. It was a common problem. So that was kind of the second requirement for the solution. That's a good question. Does it actually remove the liability? Well, I guess if someone comes in and steals all the usernames and passwords out of CSU, there's definitely liability there. If they break into Twitter and steal their usernames and passwords, I think that's where they felt that the liability kind of shifted off them from that standpoint. But that is definitely a fair question. Okay, so user experience. Now how it's going to look once we go live, which is going to be very soon, is that there's two options, basically. There's the social logins, and the three that Advancement chose for this was Google, Facebook, and interestingly enough, Windows Live. And that's what, I think they did a survey, and that's the ones they got. In addition, we can also add AOL, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, Weibo, and Yahoo. It's just a matter of setting those up. Also, if you notice on the bottom, there's still the Colorado State University, so if you have an existing affiliation, you can go ahead and use that. Okay. So once you sign in once you click on, for example, I clicked on Windows Live, you log in, enter your password, and finally what it does on the back end is it says, hey, do you want to give this application access to your account? And once you say yes, you're logged in, and if you say no, it takes you back to login. This typically happens periodically based on the length of the token for OAuth, or the Open Connect token. So not every time do they have to click on this. It's just kind of every once in a while to verify. Okay. So our existing environment, what did we start off with at CSU? We've got Shibboleth implemented for authentication. We've got Grouper implemented recently for authorization. And with Grouper, we were using subjects through a source data through SQL, groups from source data, and we had ad hoc groups. And interestingly, prior to this project, all of our authorizations to applications are being done through an API, and that changed as part of this project, so I'll talk about that in a little bit. In addition, we've got our CSU EID, which sounds a little dated, and it is, and it's our homegrown identity management system. It pulls data from the add that it was this long, drawn out process that I require um, HR it's an entry and